the cloud.
There we go.
Yeah. So we are on record. Hopefully that's okay with everyone. We're so glad that you're here tonight. Excited that we have Dr. Liz Cannon here to share her research.
And just let me know when you want me to start, Heidi.
Right. We'll start in about a minute.
Okay.
And as people come in, if we have more people, Debbie and I will be letting them in. There's Dr. Tolman. Great. Teresa's here. Hello, Carol.
Hey, how are you?
We're great. Nice
Wow.
to see everyone. Teresa. All
Looking
right.
forward to
Debbie, if you,
celebrating Liz.
I know. All right, so we're going to get started here in just a minute. We are so excited to have Dr. Liz Cannon here. She has done so much work in our state with reading, and we're just so excited that she has finished her doctoral program and is going to share all of her results from her doctoral studies. So, Liz, welcome and thank you so much for sharing this with us. We are recording this, so we will have to share with our colleagues, and we have a Q&A. So as you have questions, folks, please feel free to write those in the chat and we will get back to you. One of our Reading League board members, let's just see, we have some Reading League board members on tonight. So we have Dr. Carol Tolman, and I'm Heidi Zollman. We have Teresa Starkey. We have Debbie Dubril, and anyone else from the board that I'm not seeing. All right, so as people pop on, we want to all welcome you here tonight. We're excited, and we're going to let Dr. Cannon get started. Again, please put your questions in the chat and we will make sure to get back to you with all of the answers. And we'll probably have a few minutes at the end to just ask questions of Dr. Cannon and, see what we can do to support our members, everyone in New Hampshire. And take it away, Liz. We're excited. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Heidi. I'm happy to be here tonight and share the results of my doctoral research study that was titled Specialized Literacy Professionals and the Science of Reading, a study of leadership, challenges, and opportunities in New Hampshire elementary schools. So I like to start off with a quote by Kofi Annan. He was a former Secretary General of the United Nations, and he is quoted as saying that literacy is a bridge from misery to hope. It is a tool for daily life in modern society. It is a bulwark against poverty and a building block of development. For everyone, everywhere, literacy is, along with education in general, a basic human right. Literacy is, finally, the road to human progress and the means through which every man, woman, and child can realize his or her full potential. And I like to start with this quote because it really centers the idea of literacy as a basic human right. Sorry, there we go. So, 1 second, my slides are skipping some. There we go. Skipped through that one by accident. So when you do a doctoral research study, you start out with your literature review where you look at the key points and the key research behind what you're studying to kind of come down to focus on your question. And so a synopsis of my literature review included looking at the role of what the International Literacy Association calls specialized literacy professionals. So you'll hear me refer to them that way, or also as SLPs, which can be confusing because most of us think of speech and language pathologists when we hear that. Here in New Hampshire, we call them reading and writing specialists. So I dug deep into the history of that role, also looking at the performance in reading over time, both as a nation and in New Hampshire, and then also looking at the copious amounts of research we often refer to as the science of reading that can help inform our instruction. So this is a quick kind of timeline of the history of the reading specialist role. It actually started back in the early 1900s, and at that time, they did not work directly with students. So they more oversaw programs and curriculum and teachers. And then as we moved up to the between roughly the 30s and 50s, there started to be more reading clinics at universities, and there began to be some remedial reading instruction even in schools. And then as we get to the 60s and 70s, we get Title I. And Title I created something that we're still using to this day, but a resource of funding for many teachers to work with struggling students. And many teachers who went down that road eventually became actual reading specialists. As we moved into the 80s and the 90s, there became more of like an expertise role, kind of assigned with the reading specialist position. Professional organizations like the International Reading Association, it was the International Reading Association then, now it's the International Literacy Association. They started recommending that there be a reading specialist in every school. And the profession started to kind of redefine itself a little bit. And as we reached the 2000s, early 2000s, this is kind of when I entered the realm of education, and we had No Child Left Behind. We had the rise of RTI, and there was the rise of reading coaches. It was a big part of No Child Left Behind. There was an emphasis on data and the use of that data and assessments to drive interventions. And then as we got a little bit further on, from around 2010 to the present, we got more literacy coaches, which was just a little bit more wide of a position than just reading coaches. We started to understand the importance of seeing literacy as reading, writing, speaking, listening, and all of those things together. And many times these people became the system leaders, experts in science of reading, interventionists, literacy coaches, and even literacy coordinators. My slides keep getting stuck here. Sorry about that. So the next part is the statement of the problem. So you have to kind of take your research and you center it and you say, okay, so what's the problem here? What do I want to really research and study? And so after I did my literature review, I found that there was an inconsistency in what that role of a reading specialist looked like and what the responsibilities were, both across the country and specifically in New Hampshire. And that was really impacted by the state's kind of local control model for schools. And despite growing expectations for reading specialists, literacy specialists to lead with the science of reading aligned instruction, it was unclear if they had received the consistent guidance, training, and systemic support that they needed. So the gap in the literature that I really was trying to look into was how these SLPs in New Hampshire perceived, implemented, and experienced their roles, particularly in relation to evidence-based literacy reforms and efforts. And so I looked specifically at elementary early education, so K through 5. From this, I came up with my research questions. It was a qualitative research study, which means I wasn't collecting data or numbers. I wasn't having people rank things on like a Likert chart or anything like that. I was taking responses, both oral and through questionnaires that were open-ended so people could speak to the questions more generally. So I wanted to look at how they perceived their roles and responsibilities in New Hampshire elementary schools. And I wanted to ask about what kind of barriers and supports that they faced in these schools, and how did those factors influence their ability to fulfill their professional roles? And then I also wanted to look into how SLPs in New Hampshire elementary schools described their knowledge of and involvement in implementing science of reading aligned practices and the impact that this had on students. And this all kind of came for me personally from spending 14 years as a literacy specialist and also having a sabbatical year where I was able to work with teachers from all over the state, but oftentimes with literacy specialists. And I started to see the variety of roles that were played. And I wanted to kind of delve into that deeper to get a more well-defined outlook on it. So I had a theoretical framework behind my research, and I started with the science of reading because that was the basis that these reading specialists needed to kind of convey and help implement in their schools. But I quickly realized that I needed more than that. They're interacting with people, with teachers, with kids, with administrators every day, and there's an interpersonal piece that comes to play there. And so what I did was nested my theoretical framework. And so I took the science of reading and nested that within sociocultural theory. And so that's the idea that you know, you're impacted by the environment you're around. You have a zone of proximal development, which we often think about with young kids and how we support and move kids within that zone. And I started to think about how literacy specialists were working with teachers and moving them within their zone of proximal development. So that was the theoretical framework behind my study and how literacy specialists helped tie these two things together. So for the study, there was really two parts to it. So the first part was an open-ended questionnaire. I sent it out to I got responses from 50 participants. 42 met final requirements. Requirements included working in a K-5 elementary school in New Hampshire and currently being certified as a reading and writing specialist. It's important to note that in New Hampshire, we have two roles. We have reading and writing specialist, and we have reading and writing teacher. Reading and writing specialist is what we're talking about in this study. Reading and writing teacher often takes on the role of interventionist solely. And so I was able to get participants from 8 out of the 10 counties and 25 different school districts within New Hampshire, which was great. And then I followed that up with some semi-structured interviews with 10 participants who were able and willing to. They had participated in the questionnaire, and this was kind of like a follow-up to that to dig a little bit deeper. They were currently teaching as a reading and writing specialist in a New Hampshire K-5 elementary school. And these participants were from 5 of the 10 New Hampshire counties and 9 different districts. So this is the questionnaire that was shared with them. And as you can see, it's open-ended questions. The first few were just kind of trying to get some information about who they were and what kind of setting they were working in. But I really wanted to know what a typical day looked like for them, what their responsibilities included, how they dealt with students and being diagnostic in working with students who struggled. I wanted to know if they participated in the letters training that was offered by the state and what kind of impact that had on them, and if their school used any specific reading programs and how that impacted their work. And finally, I wanted them just to speak to some of the barriers and supports that they had received as part of their role. So this is an overview of the areas of New Hampshire that responses came from. It took about 2 months to get all those questionnaires in, but it was well worth it. I feel like we got a good cross-section of participation. So now we get to the part where we talk about the findings. So you can see here, I actually put my research findings into a word cloud, and you can see a lot of SLPs and systems, instructional knowledge, leadership, but that big leadership word was front and center. Keeps doing that. There we go. So what I did was first look at the themes that came from the open-ended questionnaire. And these were the main kind of buckets, I'll call them, that I found from those responses. So many people said that they spent time with direct instruction and support. That could have been pull in, push out, small group, and individual literacy interventions. A lot of time spent on both giving assessments and collecting the data and organizing it so that it could be used to drive practice. So screening data, diagnostics, progress monitoring, data analysis, teacher coaching and professional development. So modeling lessons for classroom teachers, co-teaching, co-planning, and really building teacher capacity. Collaboration and team leadership. There was a lot of mentions of working as part of teams, PLC teams, MTSS teams, literacy committees, literacy district committees. There was administrative type roles and program development. None mentioned that they were actually an administrator, but many mentioned having roles such as having to do budgeting for literacy, program oversight, or literacy events, heading those up. And finally, this kind of sums all of it up pretty nicely to me in what I found is that it was a very multifaceted and flexible role. You were constantly balancing instruction, coaching, assessment, and administrative duties, and that is not always easy. So then I dug in a little bit and led interviews with some wonderful people who are willing to give me their time after completing the questionnaire. And I've arranged them here as kind of clustered them as responses to my research questions. So the first question was, what are the perceived roles and responsibilities of SLPs in New Hampshire elementary schools? And so, as I just said, it's multifaceted and expanding roles. They're instructional specialists and change agents. There's a strong focus on strengthening Tier 1. That was definitely a theme that came up. On this chart here, you'll see that I gave some data in the form of quotes that aligned with some of these themes. So for this one, one of the participants said, "My primary job is to strengthen Tier 1 so that we have less Tier 2 and 3." There's a shift from intervention to broader leadership roles. That was another ongoing theme. That's that leadership word coming back again. Balancing individual student needs with systems needs was a challenge. Although people acknowledge that they're not going to intervene their way out of this issue, there also was, a tug about kids that they knew needed the intervention and how do I divide my time? And positive impact that kept them committed to the role. There was many people, no matter, despite the challenges and the barriers, really felt like we are headed in the right direction, and that was giving them energy to continue. So the quote there says, "This is absolutely positively the most rewarding part of my reading specialist journey. People are doing great things for kids." And I should mention that I had people with everything from 1 year of experience as a reading specialist all the way up to 33 years of experience. So the next question was about how SLPs in New Hampshire elementary schools describe their knowledge of and involvement in implementing science of reading aligned practices and the impact this knowledge had on students. What I found generally with this question was there was a very strong and deep understanding and knowledge of science of reading and how that research informs instruction among almost all the literacy specialists that I spoke with. Many mentioned letters being a pivotal kind of part of their science of reading journey. It helped them understand and choose new practices. One person said the best thing that they ever did was letters, even after they were done with their graduate program. So I think that that had a big impact on a lot of literacy specialists here in New Hampshire as the state offered it for free. Um, Also, what discussed was the impact on students is amplified through investing in teachers. So there are some quotes here that I really like. One participant said, "My first layer of students are my teachers," which was really eye-opening to me, just the way that it was phrased. And I thought, oh, okay. Um, and then another one said, by helping her, meaning the teacher, I helped 16 kids. Investing in adults is an investment in kids. So that's a newer way. Many of us have discussed it, but it is a newer way of kind of going about things. And so it's important to acknowledge. And as we keep going, we'll talk about supports and barriers to doing that work. Strengthening Tier 1 instruction leads to measurable student gains, and ongoing challenges with consistency and sustainability were mentioned. One person said, how do we keep this momentum going so it doesn't just seem like a fad? And so, we no longer have the letters training. How do we keep that momentum in the state going was definitely a topic of conversation. And finally, my last question was, what barriers and supports do SLPs in New Hampshire elementary schools experience? And how do these factors influence their ability to fulfill their professional roles? So, strong organizational supports enable effective literacy leadership. This was a big one. We'll talk a lot more about systemic kind of supports. One participant noted that if we're not all looking at the same data, we can't tell if it's equitable. If every school is allowed to do their own thing, it creates inequities. So this was a really interesting one for me as I've often thought of the importance of aligning ourselves within districts, but this is true. Like if you're not aligned, then you're also creating inequities between classrooms, it might be, or between schools if you have a larger district. There was an inconsistent understanding of the role of the literacy specialist, especially by administrators. There was professional isolation, and it was a persistent challenge. This was mentioned multiple times and became one of the key findings that oftentimes people feel isolated, siloed in their work. They might be the only literacy specialists in the building, or they might be part of a team of literacy specialists, or maybe they have some Title I tutors that work under them. So there's a lot of different dynamics that can happen in different schools depending on the size and the region. There was limited time and system constraints that hinder collaboration. So that's a scheduling kind of piece that I know is a consistent barrier that we as educators in general face. Pressure to stay current with evolving research can add stress. This was an interesting finding that I had. One person mentioned that things change so fast that they were just trying to stay ahead of the curve so that they could be a good resource to their teachers. And they felt a lot of responsibility about that. And then effectiveness depends on recognition and integration of literacy leadership. So that idea of the literacy specialist, not just as an interventionist, but as a literacy leader within the building, continually came up. So then we get to the analysis of findings. So my first kind of realization was that the role that a lot of these literacy specialists were playing was kind of that of a bridge. They were connecting the knowledge of the science of reading with the systems. And in between, they were that relational leadership was how they were bridging the two through things like coaching, modeling, and mentoring. There was definitely a new kind of outlook on things. Even I would say in 3 or 4 years ago, I didn't always see. So, we used to be very focused on intervention, really getting to those kids who needed tier two, maybe even tier three interventions. And while that's still important, I think there's a new real understanding that we're not going to intervene our way out of this issue. And so we really need to focus on strengthening tier one, and then hopefully that number of students that need that to tier two and tier three will be less. And so the core realization seemed to be that there's a fundamental shift happening in New Hampshire schools right now. And we're moving away from kind of that, patching the cracks as we go to building the stronger foundation, and then layering from there, which is in line with many MTSS models. Also, literacy specialists are more than just tutors. They really are a change agent in many schools. Participants describe themselves as not just a reading specialist, but an instructional specialist and a change agent many times. There's a lot of schools in New Hampshire that not long ago were running balanced literacy. And so there was a lot of work to do to get people to make the shift towards a more evidence-based kind of model. Um, and they really help connect state and district initiatives based on research to classroom practice. And again, this is where they're serving that kind of bridging role. They are part of the data-driven decision making. They are part of the MTSS collaboration. They are oftentimes of PD facilitation. They will often give the PD sessions themselves. And they're part of the instructional leadership of a building. And oftentimes, in some of the most successful systems, that went all the way up to the district level. The bedrock of everything they do was this science of reading knowledge. It serves as their foundation. And I was happy to see that so many of them felt very secure in that knowledge. They felt like they had it, it was secure, and that their work now was in the translation of that to their teachers, getting that to happen in daily practice, getting that included in curriculum. And again, they often cited letters training as being really impactful for them in building that knowledge. So this goes back to that idea, and it goes with a quote that I read before, that the traditional model of a literacy specialist working with a student or even a small group, there starts to become this realization that by coaching, you can impact even more students. And so when that literacy specialist is working with, planning with, co-teaching with a teacher, they can impact up to 20 students. And so it's, again, an investment in adults is an investment in kids. Being able to do that, though, is often a result of whether or not there's a system designed in which they are able to do that. And again, there's the daily tension. There's the intervention versus the infrastructure. So there's those immediate student needs and the need to pull the student out who is multiple years behind, give them the intervention they need, versus that long-term kind of systems repair, that tier one coaching that we've been talking about. And many mentioned that constant push and pull and being unsure exactly how much time they should spend on each and wanting guidance around that from their administrators or the systems that they worked within. There was one quote that from a participant that it is not enough that I don't want to, oh, sorry, let me start again. It is not that I don't want to see children, but we have to fix all of this tier one stuff before that, right? So the overriding strategy seems to be leaning towards this idea of using the literacy specialists to strengthen the core and by doing so, kind of, have less tier two and tier three interventions needed. And so in a system where the setup for that, that is often the goal of the literacy specialist. And so the ecosystem of success, it requires supports. So it really requires administrative alignment. That was a key factor that was mentioned time and time again. So a shared vision with principals, with superintendents, with coworkers about what way are we all rowing? How are we all going in the same direction? How can we align our instruction in a way that will best meet the needs of kids? There was often mentioned of district coherence. So this is especially true in even larger districts. How do we get this shared vision to maintain across schools? How can we build structures to have coherence between 4 or 5 elementary schools within a district, and then also vertically up as kids leave elementary school and go into middle and high school? And a lot of literacy specialists mentioned working closely and collaboratively in PLCs, which are a shared responsibility kind of model. So literacy specialists are so important to the system, but they can't function alone and in a vacuum. And so participants noted several of these organizational features that were supports in helping them obtain better student outcomes. The weight of the role, this speaks a little bit to the isolation and also the inconsistency. So there were some people that I either interviewed or in the responses to the questionnaires that mentioned being the only literacy person in their building, and feeling very isolated by that. Like there was nobody they could talk to that really understood what they were trying to get across to people. So there's a professional isolation there that they didn't always have bonds with peers. There's also an inconsistency in the role, as I mentioned earlier. And the administrative understanding of what a literacy specialist is or does varies widely. That's a huge area for education for our administrators to really understand the role, the time, those competing priorities, all the things that live under that literacy specialist kind of umbrella, all those different roles, and the pressure that kind of stress of being the resource for your teachers and being current on all the research so that you can best serve them. Consistency as an equity issue, we discussed this a little bit, but really building more coherent systems. So data is kind of like the flashlight for equity without coherent systems where everyone is looking at the same data in the same way. Schools can't determine if they're serving all students fairly and equitably. And they also can't determine what their next steps are. So that aligned systems and coherence are definitely a key point. So the overriding summary of the findings was really figuring out that the role is changing to include not just intervention, but a much more of a focus on instructional leadership. There is a change in the knowledge required. Many people had taken letters, and so they had that background, but it also makes you wonder about people who didn't take letters or people who are just coming into the field now. Where are they getting their information from? Where are they getting their training from? And is it evidence-based? And then the system as a whole, both within districts and beyond, kind of the pipeline of how we get people into our schools to work as educators and literacy specialists. So from that, recommendations kind of came, and there were 5 main areas that I spoke to in my dissertation and gave recommendations around. One was the clarity of the role. One is professional development in science of reading and the need to kind of differentiate that for some literacy specialists to take it even a step more than what some others might have. Collaboration, using a systems approach, and then higher education, because that's where our next generation of teachers and literacy specialists will come from. So, again, talking about aligning systems, integrated systems leadership, and really figuring out how we can support both those in the role and coming into the role with some of the tools beyond the knowledge. So they need the science of reading knowledge and base to understand, but they also need the tools to understand how to be an effective leader, how to manage implementation. So implementation science background would be important. Coaching training. These are all areas that are not typically part of literacy specialist training, but are a huge part of their role in their everyday existence. So there's kind of two dual threats to literacy leadership that I see as main areas of focusing on. One is internal. So it's that, what is this role? Defining it, being clear about it. It is not going to be exactly the same in every district. There are different needs, but understanding what the kind of bins are, there's intervention, there's data and testing, there's administrative roles, there's coaching. And within a district, being very clear and you know, open with people about what their job role expectations are. I think when there's a lack of clarity, that creates not only a less effective system, but a less fulfilled and happy educator. So that is something that was one main kind of takeaway that I wanted to help try to provide resources towards. The other is an external threat, which is, where are these people coming into the role coming from? So right now, we currently only have 2 programs left in New Hampshire that will result in a reading and writing specialist certification. So the reality is that the majority of people who become reading and writing specialists right now in New Hampshire are on site-based learning plans, because you cannot become a reading and writing specialist until you've been teaching for at least a few years. And so most people are not going to be able to take time off to, enter another program. There are 2 programs that, the 2 programs that exist do work around working professionals. So they have, night classes, online classes, things of that nature. But I think that we really need more. I think we need a stronger program that in kind of incorporates the science of reading knowledge, but also the leadership, the implementation science, the coaching, and those other aspects that I was referring to. And I think we're going to have to start thinking outside the box. Site-based plans are very prevalent, and they don't seem to be going anywhere soon. So one of my concerns is, or maybe rather a better way to put it is an opportunity, is what are some ways we can better support people that are on those plans with quality professional development that will really prepare them to be in the role? So this is kind of the 5-pillar blueprint, thinking about systemic literacy leadership in our state. How can we help build these people that are entering this role? So we talked a little bit about role clarity, professional development, so balancing both the science of reading and the leadership aspect that people need to really be successful in this role. Relational collaboration, so building an ecosystem of trust. This is true both when you're a reading specialist within your building, but also as we go out into districts and even wider into the state. So we have each other to lean on. I'm currently a curriculum director, and through NHSAA, curriculum directors meet once a month in the afternoons in different regions of the state to support each other, because there's one of us usually in an area. I think that that's a need for literacy specialists as well, to have a place where they can meet and discuss common problems, problem solve together, and just support one another. So structural systems, so embedding these SLPs in the decision making at the district level, making sure that they're part of the literacy committees that are doing the work, making sure that they are part of the literacy committees that are choosing the curriculums, because they often are the ones with the highest amount of knowledge in that area. And in higher education, really re rebuilding and thinking about robust preparation pipelines that kind of build on what we already have in two programs, and kind of expand that to think about what kind of new ways can we provide this? Can we provide courses that would fulfill certain parts of the site-based learning plan? And you could patch those together to meet different competencies. Could we provide professional workshops, just different ways besides necessarily a whole master's program. Some people might already have a master's, so they're not interested in that. I think we're just going to have to start thinking a little bit differently about how we provide that. So this is an example of role clarity, like really being clear about what percentage of time you're spending on different thing. So this is an example. This is not like the one size fits all. This is what you should be doing in the role. But I think it is really imperative for administrators to think about what they're looking for and be explicit with literacy specialists about what they're looking for. And I have some research in here that clarity directly increases SLP satisfaction and self-efficacy. So that word clarity, I really held on to that one too. It seemed to speak a lot. And administrators, they need to move past ambiguous titles. So I've been in places where they've told me, oh, this is so and so, they're a reading specialist. They're not actually a reading specialist, they're a special educator, which doesn't take away from them and their abilities and their role at all. But I think it just helps everybody to understand their role better when we provide better clarity around the system. And so currently, in some places, we're still kind of using that intervention support model. This was what I worked in for a really long time. And that's a bit of a reactive way of looking at things. So we're really seeing districts starting to work to that systems leader model, where there's more of a systems paradigm in building capacity among classroom teachers, and then still, using some of the literacy specialist time to provide interventions, but also working together with classroom teachers to co-plan, coach, and kind of scaling instructional coherence across the entire building. We were at the Reading League conference in Chicago in October, and that word coherence was what I took away. I heard it time and time again. And I think it's so, so important at the building level. When you're at a district level, you can see it over time, and the importance of coherence in our instruction, in our language with students, in our systems. How is data following kids as they move through the system? So coherence was another major word that I took away from the research. The dual imperative of professional development. So again, giving them that science of reading content. If they don't already have it, we need to make sure that they get it, or that they're getting it in their teacher prep. And also filling in gaps with coaching and leadership type training. So one participant said, one of my gaps in PD is really leadership. I'm put in a leadership role, but what do I do in a conflict? And this was also brought up because, most often, 99% of the time, literacy specialists are on the same contract as teachers. They are not supervisors, they are not evaluators, but they often get put in this awkward space between the two. And so some coaching and leadership development around how to do that and support teachers and but also build relations so that teachers understand that you're working beside them, you're not there to evaluate or judge them. And sustaining the knowledge momentum. So certainly, those initial phases of getting a master's, if you did not have one, building that foundational pedagogy of reading science, and then kind of building on that with letters and science of reading frameworks. So creating shared understanding as a district around that, and then sustainment, which is always the big one. So advanced implementation science. Many people brought up the idea of what now? We did letters, what comes next? My teachers took letters, but now they don't know what to do with it. So oftentimes, literacy specialists were doing that work of helping bridge all that great content in letters into practice and working to navigate how curriculums may or may not align with that and how data may or may not, support what the current practices are. Cultivating that relational collaboration, so having that protected time for collaboration. A couple people mentioned being pulled for substitutes in their building when people were out. So really protecting the time and honoring the time because of the importance of the role. Collaborative structures, so making sure that there are schedules that allow for time for collaboration and professional learning communities and for ongoing dialogue between literacy specialists and grade level teachers, and instructional partnerships, explicitly framing the literacy specialist to faculty as a non-evaluative partner, as they're not an administrative spy. They are truly here to support and work together with you. Embedding SLPs into structural systems. So systems thinking is a huge piece of the success of districts where, I interviewed SLPs working. So many of them were kind of like the glue at the middle of the triangle. They were part of curriculum adoption teams. They were part of decision-making committees. They were part of data leadership structures. And this happened at the building level, or even I'll back up, this happened at grade levels. Then they were often connected at the building level. And then they often had another connection up at the district level to really make sure that the systems were aligned vertically and horizontally. And that seemed like a major driver for not only student success, but for a feeling of efficacy for the SLPs themselves. They felt like the work that they were doing was being heard, being valued, and moving the needle forward. The administrator's role is also really important, and there's actually a fair amount of research around the relationship between principals and literacy specialists. And it's really important that that kind of relationship is open, honest, clear. Clarity is always important. But also the district leaders and the school administrators, it's important that they invest in their own knowledge. So this requires things like, they need to take letters for administrators, or they need to be part of the training. When the training's happening, they need to sit there with their teachers so they can truly get an understanding of what it is. They can lean on their literacy specialists for like that deeper level of knowledge if they need to, but it's important that they have that foundational kind of sense. And that allows them to build shared mental models and shared visions for where they're going to bring people together and align teaching staff, resources, and structural supports all together underneath that. Again, talking about the pipeline. So, right now, a little fragile, lots of site-based plans, only 2 active master's programs. So really thinking about a robust future where we could build some programs If many of you have probably heard of the program at Mount St. Joe's, it's an excellent program and it kind of provides us with a fantastic model of how to create a hybrid program where we can have online courses for people in the evenings that need it. You can have, in-person meetings in summers, like week-long residencies. They share their syllabi. So those are some really helpful resources of successful programs that are out there. And in providing that in a way that is accessible and that teachers will really want to buy into. And also kind of selling it to our universities that this is economically beneficial to them. If you know anything about Mount St. Joe's, you know their waiting list is miles long. So this is, from a purely financial point of view, also it would be beneficial for them because there is money to be made, right? And that is something that they need to consider as well. And then the opportunity, it provides essential modernized skills directly to active educators. So one of the participants that I interviewed talked about how she was part of an in-person model and then COVID happened. And she had been hadn't realized really how unhappy she was with the program until COVID happened and the program closed and she thought it was the end of the world. And then she actually enrolled in a new program afterwards where she was able to take online classes in the evenings. And what a benefit that was to her, because she was raising children at the time. She was working in a first grade classroom, so she was able to take those things and put them into practice right in her classroom. And so that was a really successful model for her. So again, thinking about building the application of skills in a real life context while also having, mentoring and professional learning network supports and really giving the support around the science of reading and also around that literacy leadership, getting guidance from places like the Reading League and STARS, who provide frameworks to help ensure that our new SLPs hit the ground running with the technical knowledge they need and also the systemic leadership capacity that they'll need. And this is kind of that unified system that we come back to, the higher ed pipelines, creating role clarity, having targeted PD that's embedded and ongoing through that relational collaboration that can be built. And that all builds structural systems. And then we kind of loop right back around to those higher ed pipelines again. So next steps for district administrators, in the appendix of my dissertation, I created a SLP or reading and writing specialist job description with some time allocations and things for principals to think about as they're hiring, embedded SLPs into curriculum adoption and data leadership committees. Often this is done, not always, but it is really essential. Securing letters for administrators training and really kind of beefing up the knowledge of our administrators and building leadership and protecting those coaching blocks. They are often the time that people get pulled from for various reasons. In higher education, it's thinking about realigning coursework and using the bridge framework for literacy leadership maybe as a guidance with that. Developing remote or hybrid reading science pathways for working educators, and ensuring that site-based learning plan candidates receive the robust, specialized reading science mentorship and instruction that they really deserve, because this is often a pathway that most of our literacy specialists are taking. And so at the bottom there, it says empowering the SLP as a systems leader is the most effective lever for statewide literacy transformation. And with that, I end with my favorite quote, which is from Dr. Maya Angelou, who is one of my favorites. When you learn, teach, and when you get, give. So I hope that you got something out of sharing this work with you today, and happy to answer any questions.
Yay, Liz, that was amazing, Dr. Cannon.
Thank you.
Wonderful, just amazing information. And I think some people know I'm finishing up my doctoral studies and we see a lot of similarities. And I'm like, oh, I need to tap into Liz for some of this research. So amazing. I did not, let's see, I do see some questions. Exciting things happening like Gordon College. Yay!
Mm,
I know I've been waiting for
good.
that one.
Yep.
Thank you, Krista. That's amazing to know. So I think people can, if you didn't write in the chat, but you have a question, feel free to unmute. I know I have a couple questions that I put in our little document for our board, but
Sure.
does anyone have any, anything to add or questions that are on your mind?
Heidi, I would love to jump in just to
Yeah.
celebrate this, Liz. How exciting.
Yay.
Thanks, Carol.
Yeah. Thank you for the hard work that you've done and the clarity with which you communicate all of this. And it really sort of sparked. I'm sitting here writing furiously, like, what can we do at the state level, right?
Mm,
To really help bring people together. And one of the things that stuck with me, of course, me is the what do you do? You've done letters and now what, right? And
right.
Mhm.
one of the things that I'm hopeful to support in the state, and maybe it should be with these SLPs, right? These
Hmm.
learning instead of just general, I'll say, shouldn't say just, but instead of general teachers or other personnel, is to run sessions, maybe monthly or every other month, where we review and deepen the knowledge
Yeah.
base, just kind of go through. So I'm typing an email right now to someone to ask if we can use their facility and organize that. You've given me the spark
Great.
to consider pushing forward with something like that.
Yeah. Yep.
To be, at least, you're right. You can take letters in a silo and then not know how to implement it, and really push forward. And there's always new information and
Right.
knowledge
Mhm.
that we need to help clarify. Yeah.
Right, definitely. And I think that, and that's hard because, you get people to shift practices and then a few years later you say, "Oh, actually I told you to do that, but now we know this." And,
Hmm.
in the moment in a school, in the busyness of a school, like people have just adjusted, it's hard to make that switch. So I think that would be welcomed for sure.
Mm.
Great. I'll put a little plug in there. We have a new just released PADDI, PADDI, which is a phoneme awareness screener. Well, it's actually not a screener, it's an informal diagnostic
Yep.
where it's much cleaner, crisper, clearer than the past, the Kilpatrick past. Debbie, I want to make sure that we get that on our Reading League website so people can go down and just download that. But if we can, that can permeate higher ed, that can permeate our schools and our practices. That's one easy way to
Yeah.
address what you're talking about, is really making sure they're current.
Yep.
We're updated on what we can do to make things more streamlined and efficient.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yep.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
bravo and thank you for all you did there. That's
Thank you.
Yeah. What other questions, comments for Liz?
There's one in there from our esteemed award-winning Sarah Thompson. Sarah,
Okay.
would you unmute?
Hi,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. Wow, that was a welcome. Liz, my question really was just obviously taking in what you were saying. I'm so excited that you presented about this tonight. Um, what your research really spoke to me, because I feel like that I was hired kind of as a reading specialist. The school that I work in didn't have one
Hmm.
prior to my start, and now it feels as though I'm stuck, like I'm linchpinned into this role of really just working with working with students, trying to help teachers and trying to keep pushing them forward. But it's like that, because like you had mentioned before, it's like I'm stuck in this role that's kind of hard. For some teachers are great and willing to embrace research and change, and keep moving toward being the most effective. But then there's just it's just time and again, you keep getting
Yeah.
stuck. So I'm just curious if
Yep.
you had any next thoughts for those of us. And I know I'm not the only one who's feels stuck in that position.
Yeah, I guess I would say two things. The first thing I would say is like, this is where implementation science can be super helpful, right? Because it can be so frustrating. But if you think about like that implementation curve, at first you might only have 20% of them on board with you. So take your early adopters as much as you can get them and work with them. And once you get the success from them, you can see that start to spread to and you end up you'll always have that certain percentage that won't kind of buy in. But my experience has been once you can get some early adopters on board and start doing it, other people will slowly kind of grab on as well. And then the other piece I think I would say is that and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like maybe you're speaking to the like 18 hats you're feeling like you're wearing all the time of doing all the different things, which I can completely identify with. So for me, that's where I feel like the clarity around the role is really important. So you can know how much time do you expect me to be spending on intervention? How much time do you expect me to be spending on um, coaching? So you can really kind of carve that out because it will make it clearer for everybody involved, but it will also provide well-being for everybody involved because if not, you're trying to do all of the things and you're going to burn out.
Great. I see a couple hands up. Kate, do you want to go first,
Yeah,
or
I was just
Dawn?
going to
I see.
piggyback off that, and I saw
Okay.
Dawn raised her hand. I don't know if it's similar, but I think that the biggest thing for me is the statute change that I threw in the chat. So, a reading and writing specialist by statute under New Hampshire DOE Ed 500 rules is the ability to support the classroom teacher in evidence-based literacy instruction, provide targeted intervention, and oversee the implementation of the curriculum of reading. And analyze database decisions. So when we look at the statute, we have to shift our schools away from RTIing
Hmm.
and really thinking about how we can begin to move towards coaching, move towards a coaching framework, how we can support districts, administrators in understanding that it's a systems change. Reading and writing teacher allows for that direct, explicit instruction in small group. So that's where that statute changed, and that's what I threw in there.
Great.
So happy to support that conversation. We're working on that, a lot. We've been thinking about that at the state level. Don't, obviously it's local control, but that is technically, sometimes it's going back to that statute, guys,
Hmm.
with your administrator and saying, hey, this is the difference. So I hope that helps. I don't know if I answered your question, Sarah.
That's
Yeah,
great.
sorry, I'm going to speak really quick. Yes, you did. Thank you. It was just more that I think we're still stuck in the lurches, kind of
Yeah.
Yeah.
between what the law is saying in the statute and all of those things versus the reality
Yeah.
I agree. And I think a lot of
the daily in and out of
Mm.
majority of my
we
day. Because I'm on a teaching contract, I think that for a lot of us, that's where it gets tricky because
You live
Yeah,
between
and
the worlds
curriculum
a little bit.
coordinators are on teaching contracts too. So when you think about that too, often our curriculum coordinators are also under the same teaching contract. I wouldn't want you to be an administrator because that gets dicey when you're observing and teachers.
Yeah.
But I think that we're stuck in that RTI model.
Mhm.
All right, Dawn, I saw you had your hand up too. Don't want to take your time.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you, Elizabeth. I feel like everything you've said, I'm like, yeah. Did you interview me? Like literally, I'm like, oh my gosh. I do have a question, but I did want to actually piggyback a little bit on Sarah's comment. Sarah, we started data meetings not this school year, the school year before. And I was totally like just thrown into them. And I said, do I have to go get professional development for this? I've never done this before. Oh, no, you're fine. And the very first meeting, the principal looks at me and says, you're on. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So after a year of like a lot of self-inflicted, just feeling like, I don't know, just feeling bad about my performance. And I went and I did the professional development for MTSS with Stephanie Stoller. And right before school started, I sat down with admin and I'm like, this is what we need to do if you want me to do data meetings for you. Are you on or are you off? Because this is what I need. And we did it. So through the data process, it's helped other teachers see the need. We're progress monitoring. We're getting really good at all the progress monitoring that we're doing. And things are just changing because they're seeing it instead of me trying to say from the coaching perspective, there's a different way to do it, so that's been absolutely wonderful. So I feel like we are going places. But my question, Liz, is I've leaned heavily on special education to help me through the process because they're the ones who are Orton Gillingham trained. And I'm wondering if you have come across any situations where there's been a close relationship with the special education department and the reading specialist driving that change.
Yeah, it seems it's interesting. It seems so this is not part of my study. I'll just speak anecdotally more, but it seems to me that there is a different approach in elementary schools than middle schools. So often in elementary schools, the majority of the services are coming from the literacy specialists, and kids might switch over to like a learning specialist or a special educator. But then when we get to like middle and high school, the special educators don't necessarily have that literacy background in the same way. And so they're then trying to fill in a lot of other like holes with tier one and that kind of stuff. So I've seen a variety of relationships. Some can actually be very tense and kind of very um, butting heads. But, for instance, I work with a special ed director right now who's fantastic. Like she was a former school psych, and we work really closely together and see MTSS the same way and see the things that need to happen in that same way. I think that ideally, having more of that communication and integration would be a great thing, whether it's special educators teaching literacy specialists new things or literacy specialists coaching special educators. If we're both helping to build each other up, I don't think that's ever a bad thing.
Great. All right. Well, it looks like we are a couple minutes over, and I cannot thank all of you enough for spending some time with us. And
Yes.
Dr. Cannon, amazing work. I will be reaching out to you for support and research. And it was great to see everyone. And we will continue to have this discussion. And, Liz and I have already talked about what we could do with the Reading League and support all of this work. And look, we have Dr. Carol Tolman on tonight. She's got some plans to move forward. So Kate from the state, what an amazing evening. And I will get the recording soon, and we should be able to post it on our website and probably on Facebook if you don't mind.
Sure.
And please reach out if you have questions. But thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Have an amazing evening.
Guys.
Great job, Liz.
Thank you.
Stop recording. Okay.